She is a director and producer with Words Plus Pictures, and her latest project, Giannis, The Marvelous Journey, is available on Amazon Prime, and Full Court Press featuring Caitlyn Clark, Kamilla Cardoso, and Kiki Rice is available on ESPN Plus. We welcome Kristen back onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Kristen.
Thanks for having me again. It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming back onto the show. And we neglected to ask you last time. We have a little bit of a tradition because we cover, of course, the major headlines of basketball. We also cover basketball culture. And we want to get in touch with our guests about how they either fell in love with the game or first had their strongest memory of the game. So with this question, you can take it anywhere you want it. What was your first basketball memory or your favorite basketball memory so far?
Wow. My first basketball memory. This is going to be a funny one. So my dad was a men's college basketball coach for 25 years, and my earliest memory of a basketball game was being 3.5 or 4 years old. My dad was the coach at Manhattan College at the time, and I used to take the players' sweaty towels that they would throw behind the bench, and I would put them over my head and pretend that I was getting married. And all of the players and the fans used to think it was like super adorable. And it's one of those things that I've been told the story so many times. I don't know if I'm remembering it because other people have told me it or if it's a memory of my own, but that's definitely one of the earliest ones. I've literally been grown up and raised through this game. So
So with all the work you have done, and I've checked out, the documentaries I mentioned in the introduction with Giannis and Full Court Press, in particular with the Giannis documentary, what stood out to me was the sense of family between Giannis and his brothers and his mom, and just the emotion that he had. And I just want to ask you, what has been the reception of that documentary from just fans and just people just scrolling through Amazon Plus, just catching it for the first time of Giannis as a person? Has anything stood out to you in terms of this the reception you have received or Giannis has received just from the project being out there for a little bit?
yeah, I mean, it's all anecdotal, of course. Just people have reached out to me, like you said, and have just the greatest compliment was I thought I knew Giannis and I thought I knew his story until I watched the film. And for me, as the director, that's a huge compliment because he is a global superstar. His story has been written about, but he and his family had never told it through their own words. And so that was really important to me to get his story right and to make sure that we were revealing kind of uncharted territory that hadn't really been addressed or covered. And Giannis really went there on a lot of the harder topics, including, the loss of his dad, growing up with discrimination in Greece, some things that he really hadn't opened up before about. And as you mentioned, that sense of family, that was really important to me after getting to know Giannis and his family over the last 3 years. It is literally the only thing that matters to him is his family, his brothers, his mom, his kids, and his fiance. And so the themes of family and fatherhood were things that I really wanted to make sure came through in the film. So anyone who recognizes that and said, I learned something and wow, I've never seen a person who cares about family in the way he does. That's a great, a great piece of feedback.
Do you think that's something that makes Giannis more unique maybe as a superstar? I mean, there are a lot of father figures in the NBA. I think LeBron comes to mind as a superstar who really has been very prominent and outspoken about being a father. I mean, do you think Giannis kind of falls in line of sort of this trend we've seen in the NBA of promoting fatherhood more?
Yes and no. I think he's very unique from most NBA players in that he's not a part of that fraternity. Like he doesn't have a ton of friends. He's a very
Mm.
private, closed off person. And I think he kind of is who he is. He's not really influenced by others. He just wants what's best for his family. And it's very authentic and real. But to your point, like it's wonderful that there are so many other dads in the NBA that promote fatherhood. He's just so unique in that, like, he doesn't like go out to the clubs. Like he's not someone that's like drinking the wine in that like fraternity of NBA players. Like it's really just like I'm going to play basketball and then I'm going to go home to my family. And that's really all that's there. So I think that he is similar in terms of like some of the values he has to other players, but he's also unique in that way. I think it's also a very Greek thing, the way that he's wired. It's, I'm 100% Greek, and a lot of the people that I know are family is like above all else.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's also similar, and it's such like an obvious comparison to draw because he was the MVP right after Giannis, but Jokic is very similar in that way. I mean, very much about family, and even has been maybe even more outspoken directly about that in interviews compared to Giannis. In like, I'm getting my work done and then I'm going home to see my family. It's just an interesting newer trend that we've seen in the NBA.
Totally. And I mean, those guys are both, European. So maybe that's, maybe there's something to that.
So to that point, and this might be an unfair question. We've heard a lot of players like LeBron. There's been rumors of him getting involved in ownership when he retires. Other players, Draymond's testing, him being in the media. Where do you see Giannis in terms of when he, retires? Because he was at, I believe, EuroLeague, just a few days ago. Very involved with the international part of the game. Where do you kind of see once he retires? You see fades into obscurity, or do you see him remaining in the basketball community, even though you said he remains kind of separate from his peers?
Yeah, so I could see him going to one of two ways. And I mean, this is from what he's told me, of course. The first one being he has said that coaching is appealing to him. He likes connecting with the younger generation. He was joking when he was, captain of the All-Star game, but like he had the notebook out and he was taking, he took it very seriously. And he really does love the X's and O's and the strategy. And so he has said that coaching would interest him. The other side of the coin is that he has also said that he could see himself kind of pulling a Tim Duncan and moving to he literally he's like moving to a Scandinavian country where nobody knows who I am and just fading off into oblivion. He's mentioned having 7 kids and just kind of living his life as a normal man somewhere in the world where people don't know Giannis. I guess I feel like there aren't very many places that's the case since he's such a global figure at this point. But I could see him going either way.
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, just one more follow up to Giannis and this whole family dynamic. I mean, maybe it's not something that is really on Giannis's radar necessarily, or something that he even is all that concerned with. Because when you prioritize family like that, it's a little bit different. But do you think taking that priority and having that angle, when you compare other players who have been up in that high multiple MVP stratosphere, like borderline face of the league type conversations, you think about like Kobe, you think about Jordan to an extent. It was always like excellence, greatness, obsession with the game, themes like that. Whereas, something like Family Man, which I think is a wonderful thing. That's certainly what I want in my own life. Do you think that is an inhibitor in some ways to Giannis being accessible as a superstar in some sense? And do you think he even minds that?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't want to detract from the fact that he is the ultimate competitor. Like I have
Yeah,
never
sure.
met anybody that's as competitive as him. So he is that unique kind of blend of family man and competitor. Um, he said things to me in the interview that didn't end up making the film, like, you know, people win a championship or they win an MVP and they go and they have their steak dinner and they have their wine and they take a break. But for me, there's never a break. It's always like, what's next? What's next? What's next in my career? And like, he's always back in the gym. He doesn't take a day off. There are no vacation days. His fiance Mariah has said that. She's like, we go away for 2 weeks every summer, and the guy is working out for 3 hours every morning. Like he is singular in that way. And I feel like, as you mentioned, all the greats are wired that way. The Kobe's and the Jordans, they have just that. They're different than you and I. They have that mindset and that mentality that kind of there's never a break.
So that's not a burden on him. Does he have? Does he enjoy the grind, or does he? From talking to him, is it still like, oh, I have to do this in order just to maintain my standing within the league? Does he kind of have that love affair with the game where he's willing to put in those hours even when he's on vacation, or is it a little bit of like, I wish I didn't have to do this in order to maintain my standing?
No, he loves it. It's never like a chore for him. He said it. He's like, I started playing this game when I was, 13 years old because I wanted to give my family a better life, and I owe everything to this game. And so I will like, make sure that I'm giving back to the game every single day. And it's not a chore. It's what he loves. It's what he enjoys. And I think he's gonna have, a decade more of success in this league.
So, final Giannis question from me. Um, in the beginning of the documentary, Milwaukee is profiled, and I just want to ask you his relationship with the city of Milwaukee. How has that evolved since he's been drafted into the league? Um, can I keep kind of point out some things that he has grown to have an affinity for the city, or is it just a destination for him to play basketball? What's his relationship with Milwaukee like?
Oh my gosh, it's just such a unique relationship between franchise player and city in a way that is almost hard to describe. He's so loyal. They took him in, and he said this, like they took him in when he was this nobody who could barely speak English, who was homesick for his family, and they embraced him. They both have this kind of hard nosed grittiness about them. They're not flashy. They don't care about the big Hollywood scene. And I think they have a lot in common, Giannis and Milwaukee. And it is home for him. He has told me no matter where he ends up in the world or where he retires, he will always have a house in Milwaukee. It's where his three children were born. He feels very connected to it. It's where his mother and his brothers have lived now for, a decade with him. And it's funny. He said to me, he's like, when I go to LA or New York or even Greece, like people are constantly hounding me and asking me for my autograph and taking pictures of me. He's like, but in Milwaukee, I can go to like a Target and people kind of leave me alone. It's like I'm one of them, and like I just think that's really cool that he feels that way about the city. So there's definitely a very special connection there.
I want to shift gears and I want to discuss your latest project that's on ESPN Plus. Um, I think it's incredible with Full Court Press. They're taking three of the most popular players at the time of college basketball and telling their stories. How did this project come about, and what kind of type of challenges did this have compared to your other projects? It's because you're profiling three different people. You have to tell equal stories about three star players, and they all have very unique narratives about their love for the game and what they have to go through a college season. So, what were those challenges like?
Yeah, so the origin story of Full Court Press is all born from Peyton Manning. He has the production company Omaha Productions, and they had just had a lot of success with the series Quarterback for Netflix, which followed three NFL players. Obviously, I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with it. But Peyton really wanted. He's always been a huge women's basketball fan. He had developed a friendship with Caitlyn Clark, and he approached her and he was like, how cool would it be to kind of do quarterback, but for women's basketball in this amazing moment in the history of the game? And so she agreed. And at that point, Peyton came to myself and the company that I work for, Awards and Pictures, and he asked us to partner with him. He was aware of my background, having done Dream On, having told a lot of women's sports stories, and it was such an honor to for him to trust me in this role in this story. It was kind of his baby, and from there we were able to as a team kind of cast the remaining two players. You mentioned it's three different storylines, similar to quarterback, so it was really important to Caitlyn and to all of us that we had two players that really complemented her story nicely. And so we really looked to diversify the other two spots, and I think we achieved that with Kamilla Cardoso and Kiki Rice. Uh, the two could not be further from one another in terms of like their origins. Kamilla, from Brazil, humble beginnings, was raised by a single mom who ran a spice stand in the streets of Montes Claros, Brazil. And Kamilla left Brazil at 15 to come to the United States in hopes that she would, play basketball and eventually make money to support her family. So that was kind of Camilla's why as to, how she got here. And so I felt like the stakes for her story were really, really high. And so that was kind of like why we chose her. And then Kiki, on the other side of things, has a fascinating upbringing in a totally different way. Grew up in DC. Her aunt is Susan Rice. She's held a number of political positions on 2 or 3 different presidential cabinets. And so, grew up in the spotlight. Her parents are run very, very successful businesses. And so her whole thing was like, I want to get out of DC and go to LA and kind of try to build my brand and try to do something at UCLA that no one's ever done, which is win a women's championship. And so again, like they all had their different why for like why they were playing the game, what they were putting into it. And I felt like you needed to have that diversity in the show in order to, I don't know, I guess just make it compelling for 4 hours. Cause 4 hours is a lot of, is a lot of content time, especially for college kids. But I felt like these 3 women were fascinating and they absolutely carried the time.
You mentioned the whys for the first 2 players, and just to go full circle with that, what was the why for Caitlyn Clark for our listeners who might not know?
Absolutely. I mean, Caitlyn was carrying the game on her back. Like she was the face of women's basketball. We're in this movement, right? This pivotal movement in women's hoops. And Caitlyn was the person that brought us there. And so, I mean, for a 22-year-old to carry that pressure on their back, it's amazing. It's amazing. And so, her why is, and this is, this is a funny story, and I've told it before, but before I do big interviews, I always call my mentor Tom Rinaldi, and I just kind of pick his brain and get advice from him. And he said something to me that stuck before I interviewed Caitlyn, and that was, he said to me, he's like, in 25 years, your daughters are going to be learning about Caitlyn Clark in textbooks the same way that you learned about Billie Jean King. And it kind of like was like a whoa moment for me. Like she has so far surpassed just a basketball player. She speaks for and stands for so much more at this point. And that was by far the most fascinating storyline to follow over the course of the last season.
Is that, I mean, we talked about burdens with Giannis potentially earlier. I mean, that's a huge burden for a 22-year-old, as you mentioned. How do you think, from your time around her and researching and interviewing, how do you think she feels about that and is managing that as someone who's only 22 years old?
Yeah, I mean, she says this all the time that people see her play basketball 3 times a week or 2 times a week for 2 hours, but people don't see the rest of it, right? And there's a lot of work, and there's a lot of it's just not easy to be Caitlyn Clark. Like she took all of her classes online this past year because she would get swarmed with students and she just can't live a normal life anymore. And you don't really think of that when you're thinking of these superstars, because you're like, oh, they're so lucky and they make all this money and they have these great lives. But to have a front seat at a 22-year-old navigating this life and this enormous amount of, just everybody in the country kind of wanting from her, it's a lot. And so I think what we did in the show that I was really proud of was we did show both sides of that, the pros and the cons of fame and the tremendous amount of fame that she kind of, it was overnight, truthfully, right? Like it was over the past year. It's not like with a Giannis where it kind of comes and it builds over time. And then over 10 years, he is who he is. She kind of came on the scene in the tournament, NCAA tournament last year, and now she is a household name. So it was really compelling and interesting to kind of be with her during this very special time in her life.
So you mentioned the pressure that they have to go through, especially during the time you filmed the documentary. How did the players adjust having cameras, with them pretty much? I would assume 24/7, compared to, hey, you have cameras during the game, press conference, and it's over. But now they're with them all the time. How was that adjustment for them?
It was definitely an adjustment, more so for some than others. And don't forget that it's not like we were just with these three players outside of the program. We were with these programs. So we needed buy in not only from the three players, but from all of their teammates, from their head coaches, from all of the people involved in this program. And that was the part that was really tricky. It's like, how do you convince Lisa Bluter and Corey Close and Dawn Staley to let you have cameras in their locker rooms during, moments after a loss, for example? Like, I had never seen that or been a part of, intimate access like that in during hard times. And I give them all a lot of credit because all three of those head coaches, they want to grow the game, and they see that the way to grow the game is by telling these stories and letting people in. And same with the athletes, of course. They let us into the most private, most sacred places in their world, and we don't take that lightly. We were so grateful for that, but I do think audiences appreciate that, and they know the difference. If you're in a spot where there's 30 other cameras, or if you're in those intimate moments capturing the stuff that nobody else sees.
I have kind of a strange question, and I know we've got to get out soon, so this will be last question from me. Caitlyn Clark, in some ways, there's been, I mean, we just had the WNBA 25 anniversary, and there's been a lot of work to build the league. There's been a lot of great players in the league. And then simultaneously, it does feel like, at least outside looking in, you see the ratings that happened in that NCAA tournament, this previous, most recent one, and then the year before it, and how the ratings really shot up. I don't think it's fair to say it's all Caitlyn Clark, but I think it is fair to say she has been a huge catalyst for that. Given, and I've seen from both media, from current players, from former players, there's been a bit of, I guess, like challenging statements. And in some ways, I certainly respect that because you have to compete against her, and you're certainly not handing a competitor anything. But do you get the sense, is there some sort of resentment or friction about Caitlyn Clark being this trailblazing figure? Is there envy about that? Or is the negativity that we're seeing just a function of maybe media in general? I know that's a huge, messy question, but I'd love your perspective for whatever of it you can answer.
I think most of it is the media, if I'm being totally honest. I think that Caitlyn is so appreciative, and at every chance she gets, she thanks the generations of players that have come before her, and has talked about the Dawn Staleys and the Diana Taurasi's and the Lisa Leslie's and the Cheryl Millers that have all come before her, that have laid the groundwork and the foundation, who have not been credited and received the attention that she has. And I think she's done a really good job of that. I think that the coaches like Dawn Staley, after she won the national championship, like, she thanked Caitlyn for growing the game. And the people that care about the game, they don't care how it's grown. They just want more people and more eyeballs. And I've said this so often, it's like people come for Caitlyn and then they're pleasantly surprised by all of the other amazing talent and all of the other amazing storylines and coaches and players that are returning for next year now. And so if it took Caitlyn to get all of those people there, then so be it. I mean, that's what I think a lot of the greats, Sue Bird has said that, Diana Taurasi, Dawn Staley. Yeah, some of the OGs in the WNBA have given her a little bit of a hard time, and she's a rookie, but I don't think it's anything deeper than just like, surface level. Oh, she's going to come in here and just kind of giving her a hard time. I don't think there's anything more to that. I think that a lot of the coaches and the players who have been around the game know that she is good for basketball and for women's basketball, regardless of whether or not she's their favorite person or their best friend or whatever it may be. They all know that she's good for the game.
Kristen, this has been a fantastic chat. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. Can you please let our audience know where they can find you on social media, any projects you're working on in the future? And thanks again for the chat.
Absolutely. I am Lappas K, I believe, on Instagram. I'm so bad with social media, and I am K Lappas 14 on X. And I am actually doing a documentary on Dawn Staley right now, one of my idols and people I respect more than anyone in the world. So it's another dream project in the women's hoops world. And yeah, I hope everybody is able to check it out when it comes out.
Awesome. We'll be on the lookout for it. Thank you very much.